Chapter 36. Breaking Point. Are you sure you don't want to adopt him? Hazashi teased. Shota glared at him. I hope you at least made sure our mics are muted before saying something so stupid. I'm a professional radio host, of course I did, that's old hat. Hazashi waved away his worries. Come on Shota. The kid literally just won his last fight by taking a nap. If that's not your son, I don't think anyone is. He won his fight by confusing his opponent and focusing on his quirk. Shota argued. It was only logical. Hazashi grinned. Exactly. He's logical just like you are. He already has parents. Shota repeated. And are you forgetting that you would also be his parent in this hypothetical? The way you're describing it, you'd basically be adopting a smaller version of your husband, which would just be weird. Nah, he's chaotic enough that I'm sure we'd have fun. Hazashi shrugged. So. Still not happening. Kirishima could practically feel the confused rage coming off of Bakugo in waves as they waited for the match to begin. He could relate, at least a little bit. This sports festival hadn't gone anything like how Kirishima had thought his first sports festival would go when he was growing up. Looking back, it was kinda stupid, but for some reason he thought that he'd mostly be fighting his classmates in flashy fights that would be determined by who was stronger. It was supposed to be simple, straightforward, and easy to understand, but instead he'd gotten a good mix of both 1A, 1B and even a few support and Gen Ed thrown into the mix that were actually pretty decent threats. The support students had both disqualified themselves by stepping out of the ring, so he couldn't even assume that everyone's goal was always to win. It made things more complicated and harder to predict, but Kirishima thought he was doing a pretty decent job at rolling with the punches. Which was what his job was now as well. Bakugo was having a much harder time adjusting to the reality of the festival, and Kirishima thought he'd heard something about him being childhood friends with the support student that was supposed to fight him last round, so it made sense that he was getting angry and frustrated. They'd all come into this event with a set of expectations that had been immediately turned on their heads, and Bakugo wanted to be the best, so it probably hurt a lot that he'd had his victories swept out from under him in practically every round so far, which was why Kirishima was determined to let his friend fight out all those tricky feelings. He wasn't sure if he'd be able to win, even though he was definitely gonna try, but the support students had shown him that his motivation didn't have to be to get first place. It could be just to help his friend feel better. That didn't mean that it wasn't going to hurt getting pelted with explosion after explosion, but that was why Kirishima had his quirk. The second midnight began the match. Bakugo launched himself forward and Kirishima instinctively hardened his body right as an explosion went off in his face. He immediately returned a punch that Bakugo dodged, but he didn't give up. He'd probably reach his quirk's limits before Bakugo did, and if that happened, the fight would be over. It's okay, Baku bro. Kirishima grinned and launched another punch. Let it all out. Shut up, shitty hair. Bakugo yelled back. This isn't some stupid therapy session. I'm gonna kill you and I'm gonna win. Kirishima laughed. Alright, bro, I believe you. Just keep those explosions coming, I can hardly feel them. That's because your skin is a fucking mountain. Bakugo grumbled, dodging another one of Kirishima's blows. And stop smiling. You're just like stupid fucking Deku. Deku? Kirishima asked curiously. Is that the support student you're friends with? We're not friends. Bakugo growled. I think the nerd made that pretty fucking clear. The explosion that followed seemed slightly hotter than some of the others, so Kirishima figured he must have hit a nerve. Is that part of why you're so frustrated? He seems like a nice guy. I'm sure you two can work things out. Shut up. Bakugo let off another huge explosion that made Kirishima hiss as some of his skin chipped under the force. That stupid nerd gave up. He gave up being a hero and he gave up on our fight before I could even give him the beating he deserved. Well then, don't give up. Kirishima shot back, pushing through the urge to soften his body. You can be better than him. I already am. Bakugo screamed. I already am, and that's the point. The idiot Deku is looking down on me and he won't even fight me. I'm a threat, damn it. Fight me. Kirishima rolled his eyes and kept talking, even though he was quickly running out of breath. I am fighting you, Bakugo. Then why? Didn't he? Every word was punctuated by an explosion, and Kirishima felt his quirk finally give out after only two. He owed me a fight. The smoke cleared and Kirishima didn't know how he looked, but considering the gasps of the crowd, it couldn't be good. He could already tell that one eye was swollen shut and the places that his skin had chipped away when he was in his hardened form had already started to bleed. You did it, bro. You won. Kirishima smiled and looked up at his friend, unable to really see his expression with only one eye. I hope you're feeling better. Glad I could help. He could feel his head spinning until he finally gave into blissful darkness. Kirishima is KO'd. Midnight announced. Bakugo advances to the finals. The stadium erupted into cheers, but Katsuki couldn't help watching with muted horror as the Medbots wheeled Kirisha from the field. That beating hadn't been meant for him. It had been meant for Deku, but then Deku had flat out refused to fight him. Katsuki's rage had been growing so much all day that he just needed to take it out on someone, and he thought that with his quirk, Kirishima would be able to take it, but either Kirishima was weaker than he'd thought, or Katsuki was a lot angrier than he'd realized. He hadn't meant to really hurt him. Katsuki numbly made his way back into the tunnels. Kirishima's injuries burned into his brain. That beating hadn't been meant for him, but he'd taken it because he thought that's what Katsuki needed. He did need it, but... well, maybe he needed a better outlet? So, still no idea how Shinso's quirk works. Kamakiri asked. I almost thought it might be something like verbal response or something. Kendo said. But he didn't say anything to Dark Shadow before taking control of him in the last fight. I think the nap has something to do with it. Kodai suggested. He might have a limit of people that he can control before he has to sleep and reset. That would explain why his eye bags are so bad. Subaraba agreed. But then why wouldn't he do that backstage? He had time between rounds, right? That she-demon from support probably distracted him. Monoma dismissed. But it doesn't matter, it shouldn't be too difficult to figure out once I get my hands on it. Monoma smirked confidently and reached out to grab the quirks he wanted for the fight. Shiozaki's vines would help him pull Shinso in close so he could steal his quirk. Komori's spores would be a good backup plan just in case he wasn't able to steal brainwashing, and Tetsu's steel would be good if it came to a hand-to-hand fight, with the added bonus that he could use it to anchor himself into the concrete so that Shinso couldn't tell him to walk out of bounds. There was absolutely no way he could lose. He confidently made his way through the tunnels and out onto the field, where Shinso was already waiting, a bored expression on his face. Midnight nodded to him and Monoma tuned out whatever introductions Present Mike gave before the match officially began. He'd show everyone that 1B was the best in the whole school. Begin. So, Shinso raised one eyebrow, still looking infuriatingly bored. You're the 1B guy who thinks he's so superior, aren't you? I don't think I'm superior. Monoma laughed. I am superior. It's only a matter of time before I take that perfect little brainwashing quirk and turn it against you. Is it? Shinso asked. Well, I would be looking forward to it, if I thought you could actually do it. Monoma snarled and snapped some vines toward Shinso, who even dodging looked just as bored as he had at the start. Perhaps the lack of expression was his quirk's limit. It would be inconvenient if he had to maintain the same emotion or facial expression to activate brainwashing, but Monoma wouldn't let something small like that keep him from taking his rightful place on the winner's stand. Better than the rest of us that I don't even merit a snide insult? What, you're not even going to acknowledge your win? Monoma snarled. Do you really think you're so much better than the rest of us that I don't even merit a snide insult? Shinso looked over his shoulder and raised one eyebrow, almost like he thought the answer was obvious. Then a look of confusion passed over his face briefly before something seemed to click. A smirk slowly made its way onto Shinso's face, but he didn't make any other response before he turned back around and disappeared into the tunnels. All right, the lights are off, and we already gave you water, Izuku fretted. Is there anything else we can do? It's just a migraine, Izuku, Hitoshi groaned. I get them all the time and I overused my quirk against Tokiyami, so it was gonna happen anyway. We're just lucky that blonde kid's an idiot and didn't bother to figure out my quirk after the match, otherwise the secret would be out. He's not an idiot, Hitoshi, be nice. Izuku squeaked. He's actually got semi-decent grades and he's at UA, so even that. Hitoshi tuned him out as he felt something cool touch his forehead. He cracked one eye open to see May holding some kind of ice pack that he was 90% sure she'd only brought along in case one of her inventions overheated. Be quiet, Izu-kun. May whisper yelled. Don't you know that too much noise makes migraines worse? But you. Quiet. May glared at Izuku until he started silently pouting and Hitoshi couldn't hold back a small smile as he closed his eyes again and settled back into whatever nap he would be able to get between rounds. Considering that, from what he'd gathered, his next opponent used to be Izuku's bully, he'd need every second of rest he could get. Chapter 37. Final. Hey, we should ask 1B what that Shinso guy's quirk is. Kirishima grinned and jumped to see over the wall between their classes. Hey, guys. Have you figured out how that Gen Ed student's quirk activates? Shut up, shitty hair. Katsuki grabbed him by the collar and dragged him back. I don't need those stupid extras' help to win. I'll do it on my own, got it? Kirishima yelped and rubbed at his neck, but Katsuki was 90% sure that was just for show. Recovery Girl had patched him up pretty well, so he just had a few bandages and none of his injuries would even scar, so Bakugo was trying not to feel too bad about it. If he let himself think too much about it, he just started feeling more angry, which defeated the whole point of him taking things out on Kirishima to begin with. Luckily, his next fight was with Deku's creepy brainwashing friend, so even if he couldn't take things out on the guy who deserved it, he'd at least be able to beat someone associated with him. He couldn't wait. Even if your Pomeranian was willing to accept our help, we wouldn't tell you. Monoma grinned as he peeked over the wall. That information is a Class B secret, so why would we willingly assist our rivals? He's only saying that because he hasn't figured it out yet. Kaminari laughed. Your class is just as clueless as ours is. Monoma's face turned red and he seemed like he was about to say something, but before he could, that kendo girl with the big hands gave him a karate chop to the neck and some other members of his class dragged him back down to their seats. Kendo sighed and gave their class an apologetic smile. Sorry about him, he gets a little carried away. It's quite all right. Momo said kindly. But Bakugo should probably be getting ready for his fight unless you have any info. I already told you, I don't want your damn pity help. Katsuki yelled. We're clueless anyway. Our best guess is that he has to cause a certain level of confusion in his opponent before his quirk can take hold. Kendo shrugged. But good luck. Don't need it. Katsuki huffed. I'm the best. He rolled his eyes and ignored the shouting of all the extras as he stalked out to go to the prep areas. He was in prep room 1, right? He glared at nothing and didn't talk to anyone until he found the room and kicked the door in, only to be met by Deku, Deku's crazy girlfriend, and the brainwashing extra. He saw red. What the hell are you doing in my room? Deku had the balls to glare at him. This is Hitoshi's prep room, Katsuki. Prep room 2. You're in prep room 1. This is prep room. Katsuki glanced at the door and scowled. Whatever, Deku. You're lucky I don't pound you to the ground right now. We're still on school property. Deku said confidently. And Nedzu has cameras everywhere. Not to mention that if I end up with unexplained injuries, there's live footage of you threatening me. How would you explain that to Eraserhead, I wonder? Katsuki let out a few threatening explosions in his hands, but that was all he could do. Unfortunately, Deku was right, but that just meant he'd have to work extra hard in the next fight to make sure the nerd and his dumb friends knew their place. Both of you, shut up. That crazy bitch who played Monoma for a fool in the first round stalked up to them, hands on her hips as she glared up at him, Your stupid shouting is bothering extra credit-kun. Katsuki glanced over and, sure enough, the purple-haired extra was grimacing and he had his arm held over his eyes like he was trying to block out the light. Katsuki resisted the urge to smirk at the obvious display of weakness and turned to leave. He didn't know why he'd ever been worried. He had this fight in the bag. Later, Deku. Katsuki threw over his shoulder. Can't wait for your friend to give up just like you did. He let the door slam shut behind him. Tamura shrugged. They've got a rager on their team. Ah, yes, young Bago. Sensei agreed. You should keep an eye on him, young Tamura. Perhaps we can find a way to turn him to our side. Some of the other students have potential as well, do they not? Maybe the brainwashing kid. Tamura frowned. But he's got those NPCs who won't leave him alone. Perhaps that's not such a bad thing. Sensei pointed out patiently. Having good support can make the difference between success and failure. So, they're more like party members? Shigaraki frowned. I guess it's hard to win a dungeon with only fighters. Just keep it in mind. Sensei said. And watch carefully. These students will be your enemies soon enough, young Tamura. Hitoshi's head was still pounding when he stepped out onto the field, squinting his eyes in the harsh sunlight and trying to ignore the roaring of the crowds. Thankfully, Recovery Girl had given him some pretty strong painkillers for the fight, but this fight still wasn't going to be fun, especially since he was fighting a bully that someone had decided to strap a nuke to. A few months ago, he might have thought winning this fight was as impossible as beating a bunch of robots, but he was stronger now. And he was here to win. Midnight gave Bakugo a warning glare, but she didn't stop him as he set off a few warm-up explosions in his palms. Hitoshi had to concentrate hard not to wince at the noise. When this was over, he was going to sleep for a solid 3 days. All right, boys, I want a good clean fight. Midnight warned them. Remember, you're here to win, not to kill each other. Hitoshi figured that was meant for Bakugo, not him. He'd seen Kirishima in the nurse's office after the last round. Bakugo could be brutal when he wanted to be. Hitoshi's best bet would be to not give him a chance to hurt him. The only trick was getting him to talk. The final fight begins in 3, 2, 1. Midnight cracked her whip. Begin. Hitoshi opened his mouth to say something, only to be blindsided by a bright boom just feet from his face. He hissed and ducked away as his head started throbbing. Shit. Your stupid quirk hurts your head, doesn't it? When the smoke cleared, Bakugo was smirking down at him. People forget that quirks are physical abilities and can get tired just like anything else, and you've been using that stupid brainwashing quirk since we got here. Hitoshi swore and rolled to dodge another explosion, then jumped to his feet and ran as fast as he could to put some distance between them. His eyes were watering so much that he could only hope that he wasn't getting close to the line. He just needed to get him to talk and then this fight would be over. He just needed a response. I don't know what Deku even sees in you. Bakugo snarled, letting off another explosion far too close to Hitoshi's face to be comfortable. You're just a weakling and a future villain to boot, with that quirk of yours. You should just give up now. Hitoshi swallowed thickly. He felt like he was about to throw up, but he couldn't give up. He wouldn't give up. He wasn't going to let all of the training and help he'd received go to waste. He was going to be a hero. Seems to me like you're the one acting like a villain. Hitoshi grit out. And why are you so obsessed with Izuku? I bet you admire him, don't you? You want to be just like him. I'd never want to be like that nerd. Bakugo let loose an explosion so powerful that it chipped the concrete where Hitoshi had been a half-second before. He's nothing, got it? He's not even a pebble on the side of my path to greatness. Hitoshi's head was pounding so badly that he could barely feel the link as it finally formed. Bakugo was readying another explosion, but Hitoshi forced himself to stand tall and stare him down, even as he charged to begin his attack. He was going to be a hero. He activated his quirk and Bakugo immediately stopped in his tracks like a puppet whose strings had been cut. His hold was a lot more shaky than it usually was and he could feel Bakugo fighting against his control, but Hitoshi took a few deep breaths. If his brain took control of his victim's body, then maybe he could force Bago to calm down by going through those same motions himself. After a few moments, Bakugo's shoulders slumped and even though Hitoshi could still feel him fighting, it was weaker than it had been a few minutes before as the adrenaline started ebbing away. Hitoshi kept breathing and the crowd held their breaths as they waited to see what happened. "You're wrong." Hitoshi's voice was scratchy from exhaustion, smoke and dust, but he pushed through anyway. "Izuku is a lot more than a pebble that you can crush into powder or kick off the sidewalk. He's a brilliant analyst and the only thing you accomplished by tossing him aside was shooting yourself in the foot." That obviously made Bakugo angry because he started fighting harder again and it took all of Hitoshi's concentration to maintain his control. He was starting to feel lightheaded and the only thought he could form that wasn't pure pain was that he had to win. He had to win to be a hero. Hitoshi set his shoulders confidently, walk out of bounds. "Lose for me." Bakugo fought with everything he had, but none of that showed on his face. No, the real fight was happening in Hitoshi's brain and the only thing the crowd could do was watch with bated breath as the top hero student took those final few steps out of bounds, and then everything exploded into so much noise that Hitoshi was forced to instinctively release his control. He immediately screwed his eyes closed and slammed his hands over his ears, but he could still hear Bago growling and using his explosions to launch himself back toward his opponent. Thankfully, the sounds of Bakugo's renewed attack were quickly muffled by what sounded like one of Smontas's walls, and Hitoshi could barely hear Midnight above the roaring of the crowd as she made the announcement, "Katsuki Bakugo is out of bounds. Hitoshi Shinso wins the sports festival. I don't understand how he's not dying of embarrassment." Shiguro muttered, his goblin ears twitching in second-hand embarrassment. "I'd be mortified if I had to be chained up on national television like that." "He's an asshole," Kohaku said dismissively. "He sees being angry as a personality trait, so obviously, he's gonna have to be held back. Still, it seems like he'd just take the loss at this point." Hanzo observed. "Katsuki doesn't give up," Izuku said. "He never has and he's never been satisfied being anything but the best. Even if it wasn't Shinso in first place, he would probably still be throwing a fit, just because he didn't get what he wanted. He's a spoiled brat, that's what he is." Mei complained. "But we did it. Extra Credit Kun won the sports festival. We're gonna get our extra credit, Izu-kun. Don't you two only get extra credit if he actually transfers into the hero course?" Kohaku argued. "Not technically," Izuku said, smiling widely as All Might placed a medal around Shinso's neck. "But that's always been the goal." As if the teachers could actually say that the winner of the sports festival doesn't deserve a place in the hero course. Hanzo snorted. "Let's be honest, the only thing holding him back now is paperwork." Izuku's cheeks were starting to hurt from how widely he was smiling, but he just couldn't stop. They'd done it. All that training, all of his analysis, it really made a difference. His new dream was worthwhile and he was already doing it. He was helping heroes become better and that was almost worth everything he'd had to go through to get on this path. "Come on, Izu-kun." Mei grabbed his hand the moment that the awards ceremony ended. "Let's go see our baby." Chapter 38. Out. She simply shrugged. Izuku turned back to his phone suspiciously and read the new message. From Rat Overlord. "You could always try exploring the tunnels." The drive home was awkward at best. Shoto stared sullenly out the window as he waited for his father to explode. It was inevitable, he knew. He'd known ever since he'd seen Tokiyami steal the headbands from around his neck, but it had been confirmed when Endeavor had dismissed their usual driver and said he'd drive Shoto home himself. At least if they were surrounded by staff, His father showed at least the bare minimum of restraint, but without that protective barrier, Shoto had no idea when the tirade would start. It was exhausting. Finally, Endeavor broke the silence. Did you really lose just to spite me? His voice was deathly quiet and Shoto froze. His father's anger normally ran hot, but somehow it was always more frightening when he was cold like this. Yelling, fire, tirades, those were things Shoto had been enduring for years. He knew how to handle them, how to coat his mind and body in ice so the fire couldn't hurt him, but this had only happened a few times, which meant that Shoto had no idea if his usual strategies would work. He had messed up even more than usual and was going into his father's rage almost completely blind. He set his shoulders stubbornly and glared at his father in the rearview mirror. He refused to let the fear show. Losing to his classmates was one thing, but he refused to lose to his father. You could have won. Endeavor observed quietly. You could have stopped that bird brain from stealing your points if you just used your fire. Your fire. Shoto snapped before he could stop himself. It's your fire, not mine, and I'm going to make it to the top without it. Well, you seem to be doing a bang-up job of that so far. Endeavor spat. Your ice didn't even get you past the second round. What? Endeavor scoffed. You'll be the best with only your mother's power? I believe you found out today just where this childish rebellion will lead you, Shoto. If you hadn't shamed me so much by allowing general education and support students to surpass you, I'd almost be happy you lost. At least now, hopefully, you've learned your lesson. Shoto flinched as if he'd been slapped. His father was happy he'd lost. His own father. And it wasn't even for a good reason, was it? No, it was because Endeavor was hoping that losing the sports festival would teach him a lesson. Well, he was wrong. Shoto refused to be the masterpiece that Endeavor wanted him to be. And to make it worse, even if his father was happy, he was still going to get punished, just because of who he'd lost to. He hadn't even fought that team directly. The only interaction he'd even had with them was when they destroyed the 10 million point headband, but his father didn't care about that. The only thing his father even cared about was that a general education student had won the sports festival while Shoto had been pushed to the sidelines, and that was completely unacceptable. I raised you better than this. Endeavor lectured. You were created to surpass all might, Shoto, so act like it. You've been blessed with the perfect quirk and I've given you as much training as I could, but that's all going to be for nothing if you keep acting like a spoiled little brat. I made you to become a great hero, Shoto, my masterpiece. So stop wasting that potential and actually be my successor. Maybe that's the problem. For some reason, Shoto couldn't stop the words from spilling out. I'm your masterpiece, right? And you're an eternal failure. You've been number 2 for how long again? Face it, Endeavor, I'm your son, so can you really expect me to be any better than second best? Endeavor slammed on the brakes with enough force that Shoto went launching forward and hit his head on the seat in front of him. What did you say? Shoto gripped his nose, which was now bleeding, and tried to stop the blood from getting on the car's upholstery. You heard me, old man. I'm a better failure than you ever were. Endeavor glared at him for a long moment, then unlocked the doors, out. Shoto stared at him in shock. What? Out. Endeavor growled. If you don't appreciate everything I've given you, then maybe you don't deserve it. You insist on acting like a spoiled child, Shoto, so let's see if a night on the streets will help you grow up. Shoto opened and closed his mouth a few times, but there really wasn't anything to say. He ripped the door open and didn't even grab his phone as he got out of the car and slammed the door behind him. He half expected Endeavor to roll down his window and say that it had just been a logical ruse, like Aizawa always did, but no. As soon as the door was closed, his father just drove away. Just abandoned Shoto on the side of an almost deserted street like he was nothing. Maybe he was. The few people on the street were beginning to stare, Not that homeless people and druggies were probably that interested in the downfall of the great son of Endeavor, but still, his father would get even more angry if the media got wind of this. Thankfully, Shoto had changed into street clothes after the sports festival, so at least he was in jeans and a hoodie instead of his school uniform. That would have been harder to pass off. Even if he walked home, Endeavor probably wouldn't let Fuyumi let him in, so Shoto shoved his hands in his pockets and resolved to just wander the streets until the sun rose and his punishment was over. He gave one last look down the street, but Endeavor's car had already turned the corner out of sight. Shoto shook his head and cut through an alley, grabbing a beanie he'd found on the ground as he passed. It was a little too big and smelled like cigarette smoke, but at least it would cover his hair. There wasn't much he could do about his scar at the moment, but whatever, it was only one night, right? Yeah. Those cheerleading outfits were amazing. Mineta drooled. Yaoyorozu really outdid herself this time. I guess so, Kaminari grinned. Still not looking forward to the detention Aizawa's gonna give us, though. He just doesn't appreciate art. Mineta complained. It's like he's gay or something. Kaminari shrugged awkwardly. I dunno. I gotta get going, man, but I'll see you Monday, alright? Sure thing. Mineta gave him a big thumbs up. See you Monday. Kaminari gave a wave when he reached the end of the street and Mineta waited until he disappeared around the corner to let his smile fall. Hopefully the whole gay comment would get the guy to leave him alone. Everyone avoided the class pervert, but it was much more difficult to get ignored when someone as loud as Kaminari kept seeking him out. It was irritating. Mineta was taking a shortcut home through the bad part of town when his phone rang. The caller ID was blocked, but he thought he had a pretty good idea of who it was. How did you enjoy the sports festival? Pretty good show, right? Kurogiri was businesslike as always as he responded. Sensei has a few students he wants you to keep an eye on. Did he say who? Mineta asked. I'm already watching everyone in 1A. Class 1B will be a little more difficult, but I think I can manage. Actually, there's a mix this time. Kurogiri informed him. Shigaraki has suggested that young Bakugo might be a good addition to our organization, so test the waters there. If he doesn't blow my head off first. Mineta grumbled. Fine, who else? That is for you to discover. Kurogiri said cryptically. Sensei believes that cheat code might be a student. Mineta almost tripped over a crack in the sidewalk. What? Seriously? Are you questioning Sensei's judgment? Kurogiri asked, far too calmly. Mineta gulped, clearly hearing the threat hidden behind the words, no, of course not. I was just surprised as all. The analysis the guy gave me on my quirk was pretty intense. His analytical skill is advanced beyond his years, true. A new voice joined the call and Mineta froze. But he is inexperienced. That being said, it is most likely an upperclassman in the hero course, although the support course is another likely option. I would like you to see what you can find out. Will that be a problem? And no, Sensei. Mineta stuttered. I'll put in a request to adjust my hero costume and start keeping an eye on the upperclassmen first thing on Monday. Good. Sensei sounded like he was smiling. And good work on the sports festival. You're exactly where we need you to be. Chapter 39. Duality. Izuku and Mei were starting to get frustrated. Izuku was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the hallway, laptop open in front of him with every blueprint of UA he could possibly hack into, but so far there hadn't been any mention of tunnels or how to get in. He'd tried texting Nedzu for any sort of a hint, but all he'd gotten back was a winky face and he'd had to hide his phone to prevent Mei from stealing it and throwing it against the wall in frustration. Are you sure Nedzu isn't just pulling on your leg or something? Mei groaned. I swear, we've walked around the entire school 3 times. I swear, if that rat is just sitting in his office and laughing as we run around in circles. He wouldn't do that. Izuku said. Well, actually, the laughing as we run around in circles part Yes, definitely, he's probably doing that right now, but if there weren't actually tunnels, he wouldn't be having any fun. Nedzu likes knowing something that other people don't and enjoys watching them struggle to figure it out. It's part of why he went into education. So if there weren't actually tunnels, he wouldn't be able to feel superior? May complained, falling back onto the floor and staring at the ceiling. Ah, where are we even supposed to start looking? There's nothing in the blueprints, right? No. Izuku snapped his laptop shut and stretched. But you know that would be too easy. The entrance or more likely entrances are probably well hidden and most likely require some sort of code. Otherwise, anyone would be able to access them. But Ua is built like a maze, so. May sat up, so maybe there's a false dead end. Izuku grinned and opened his laptop again, of course. For Nedzu, it would probably be hilarious to see students reach a dead-end hallway and turn around, completely unaware that there was a secret waiting for them. Great idea, May. May grinned wildly. So which wall do I need to blow up? Izuku rolled his eyes. You're not blowing up any walls, that's cheating. Remember, this is supposed to be fun. Blowing up walls is fun. May complained. But sure, we'll try it your way and I can just blow up the wall of Nedzu's office later. You realize he's probably listening, right? Izuku pointed out. Just let him try and stop me. May punched at the air. It'll just be even more fun to break past all his defenses. Izuku shook his head and turned back to his computer. Alright, so according to the blueprints, there are at least a dozen end hallways hidden around Ua, but the closest one is. Oh, there's one between prep rooms 4 and 5. May jumped up. Race you there? Whoever's last has to clean up the testing room next class. Izuku grinned as he put his laptop away and let her pull him to his feet. You're on. May instantly shot down the hallway like a bullet, and Izuku was forced to catch up, laptop case bouncing against his side as he followed her laughter. Even if they didn't end up finding the tunnels, this was a great way to spend the evening. No one came to pick Hitoshi up from the sports festival, but then again, he didn't expect them to. Yeah, taking the train with the last remnants of a migraine wasn't fun, but it wasn't like he hadn't done it before, so he just waited in Recovery Girl's office until after the evening rush and then headed home once there wouldn't be so many people. He got a couple weird looks and a few thumbs up as people recognized his gym uniform or caught sight of the medal stuffed into his pocket, but thankfully most people didn't give him a second glance and it wasn't long before he was walking up the steps of his foster home, ready to make a beeline for his room and pass out. He wasn't that lucky. When he opened the door, some of the kids were huddled around the TV and Hitoshi froze when he realized the news was showing highlights from the sports festival. He didn't know why it hadn't occurred to him that his foster family might see it, probably because school felt safe. When he was around Izuku and May, he felt like he could take on the word, and honestly, with the amount of chaos those two caused, he probably could, but at home things were different. May and Izuku looked at his quirk and they saw him, a person with potential to be a future hero, so to them, him winning the sports festival was the ultimate goal and an amazing accomplishment that he should be proud of, but something told Hitoshi that his foster parents might not see it that way. He passed the kitchen as silently as he could as he hurried toward the stairs, but all the stealth practice in the world wouldn't help when someone was already waiting to pounce. You lied to them. Hitoshi flinched and slowly turned to look at his foster dad. He towered beside the table as his wife sat down, shoulders hunched and eyes red like she'd been crying. Hitoshi didn't say anything, obviously. He wasn't stupid. He just kept his eyes down as his foster father stalked across the room toward him. You didn't even give them a chance to fight back. He growled. You lied to them so they wouldn't be able to stop you from getting in their heads. If they'd known how your quirk works, there's no way you would have got in first place. So no wonder you won, boy, since you were willing to act like a little villain. Hitoshi opened his mouth to defend himself, but thankfully caught himself before he could make that mistake. The bastard was right, after all. If he hadn't hidden his quirk's activation requirements, he would never have been able to get first place. The hero course students may not have had the support course in their corner, but they weren't stupid. If Hitoshi had gone with his original plan and let his quirk stand on its own, he would only have been able to win one fight, maybe a few more if he was lucky, but eventually, he would have come up against someone with more self-control than he was able to handle. So he'd lied. He'd followed Izuku's advice and kept people guessing so that no one knew they weren't supposed to talk to him, and his classmates in general education were too scared to say anything. Hitoshi wasn't sure if they were more scared of him and his quirk or of Mei and Izuku, who somehow managed to say something concerning every single time they appeared in his classroom, but at the end of the day, his foster father was right. He had taken advantage of fear, confusion, and deception to claw his way to the top, just like a villain would. Anything he said to try to defend himself would only make it worse. "I thought you were trying to be good." His foster mother sobbed quietly. "You were going to UA and everything, so why did you take advantage of those poor kids like that?" Hitoshi balled his hands into fists at his sides and forced himself to stay silent. It was harder than it should have been. After so many homes like this one and so many teachers who had never heard his voice, it should have been easy to bite his tongue, but if anything, his kidnappers encouraged him to talk. They wanted to hear his jokes and opinions and never assumed he would control them, except for when they asked him to, and wasn't that a welcome change? They'd made him feel like it wasn't bad to be dangerous, because they were both dangerous too. They'd spoiled him by listening to his voice, and now it hurt even more to be silent. He hated it. "You're grounded," his foster dad informed him. "If and when you return to UA, I expect you to write apology letters to everyone you hurt and tell them how your quirk actually works. Do you understand?" Hitoshi gave a curt nod and turned toward the stairs, knowing that was as much of a dismissal as he'd get. The mystery surrounding his quirk had been nice while it lasted, but he should have known better than to think it would always be that way. His quirk made him a future villain, and that was all anyone would ever see. He finally reached his room and fell face down on the mattress. Why did he even try? The sun had set a little while ago, and for once in his life, Shoto was actually grateful for his fire. At least he didn't have to worry about getting cold while wandering around the city when he could regulate his own body temperature. He'd already decided that he wasn't going to be sleeping tonight. He didn't know what places were even close to safe, and the idea of being defenseless like that made him shiver. He'd gone nights without sleep before for Endeavor's training, and this was basically the same thing. Same for food and water. It was one night. He'd survive. He didn't know quite where he was, just that he'd never been there before, but he wasn't too concerned. If he wandered for long enough, he'd eventually have to find something he recognized, and then he'd be able to find his way home. Shoto kept his head down and kicked a rock a little ways down the street. He really was embracing his role as the family screw-up at this point, wasn't he? He'd lost the sports festival to someone from Gen Ed, he'd talked back to Endeavor, and he'd even gotten kicked out. This day just kept getting better, didn't it? He heard a small clatter behind him and instantly whirled around, dropping into a battle stance as his eyes flicked around to look for the threat. He didn't relax when all he found was an empty street. He resisted the urge to call out and ask who was there like some horror movie protagonist. No, he was a hero student, and he was more than capable of defending himself against whatever came at him. The cat meowed back at him, obviously pointing out that he was a bunk bed, just based on the number of cats he'd ended up with. Shoto glared at it. "This is your fault. You started this. You know what? Just for that, I'm going to call you Endev Purr, you deserve it." He flinched as the cat flicked out its claws and dug them into his thigh. It wasn't enough pressure to hurt, but it was a clear enough warning to Shoto to roll his eyes and give in. "Fine. I'll shorten it to Eeper, but you and I both know what it stands for." Eeper gave a satisfied chirp, and Shoto shook his head as he scratched behind the cat's torn ear again. How had he ended up here again? Oh, right, he'd lost the sports festival and then made a weird enemy. Friend. Thing out of a stray cat. How was this his life? You must have a fire quirk. Shoto jumped and Ippur hissed at the newcomer, who just scratched his neck and rolled his eyes as he sat down next to them. He wore a ratty black hoodie and jeans and looked like he was a few years older than Shoto was, probably in his early 20s, and badly needed a hairbrush and moisturizer. His father would never let him leave the house looking like that, too concerned with his successor looking perfect for the cameras, but this stranger seemed more at home in these back alleys than Shoto was. That didn't mean he was any less suspicious of him. How do you know that? The cats. The guy gestured to his collection. Even when it's just a little chilly out, they track down anything warm and fire users can either manipulate their own temperature or just naturally run a bit hotter. Hence your little fan club. Be careful of the orange one, though. She's a bitch. Oh. Shoto scratched Ippur's chin and she purred. Yeah, a little. She might let you pet her though. Do you have a fire quirk? Nah. Just can't sleep and other players will try to bully me into going to sleep if I try the game in the middle of the night. The guy shrugged. There was something familiar about his voice and the way he talked, but Shoto couldn't quite place it. Plus, it isn't terrible out here when most of the NPCs are gone. And I don't pet things. Dangerous quirk, you know? He raised up his hand and Shoto froze. Ippur didn't hiss this time, but she did headbutt into Shoto's hand to get him to keep petting her. Shoto forced himself to calm down and act natural, which wasn't difficult considering how many times he'd had to do the same thing around his father. He took back what he'd thought about not being a total screw-up though, because it shouldn't have taken him so long to recognize Shigaraki, considering that he'd tried to kill them all. He was hyper-aware of how close Shigaraki was sitting. All he had to do was reach out and Shoto would be dust. Thankfully, he hadn't seemed to recognize Shoto though, so the beanie was doing its job, though the darkness and the fact that the USJ had been so chaotic probably didn't hurt. And he thought facing off with an ornery cat was bad. So, fire quirk? Shigaraki asked. Shoto shrugged and took a deep breath. He just had to act natural until Shigaraki left. He could do that. I don't like it, but yeah. Shigaraki huffed. Yeah, I get that. My quirk's the same way. There's good things too though. My quirk lets me destroy the things I hate and yours apparently makes you a cat magnet. I'm not sure that's a positive. Shoto deadpan. I don't like cats. Shigaraki laughed. They like you. I guess. Shoto said helplessly. You're a noob in this game, aren't you? Shigaraki asked. Living on the streets. Shoto shrugged. More of a visitor. Just got kicked out for the night. Ah, you'll probably be back then. Shigaraki nodded. Most people tend to avoid this alley, too many murders, but if you ever need a place to crash you should be fine as long as you don't piss off the wrong people. Or the cats. Shoto swallowed at the threat. Got it. Don't make the cats angry. Shigaraki gave a raspy laugh. Pretty much. You're not too bad for a noob, I guess. They sat there in silence for a long time until the sky started getting lighter and Shoto's legs were starting to cramp from sitting in the same position for too long. He was busy silently panicking about how he was going to find a polite way to leave when Shigaraki's phone buzzed and he swore. Ah, Sensei's looking for me. He stretched and stood looking down at Shoto. See you around, noob. See you around. Shoto responded hesitantly. Just look for the cats. Chapter 40. Discovery. Perhaps we could talk to Shinso? Shota interrupted. We have a few things we'd like to discuss about his transfer into the hero course. But the boy was acting like a villain. The man raised his voice. You can't honestly look me in the eye and say that what he did was okay. Shinso. Please. Nedzu said, leaving no room for argument. Thank you. The couple looked at each other for a long moment, then the man nodded and they both stood. We'll go get him. Just wait here. Shota waited until they left before he growled softly, "What the actual fuck?" "This is concerning," Nedzu murmured. "But there isn't any evidence of physical abuse and the children are obviously materially well provided for. Is there any way we can get him out of here?" Shota said, keeping his voice down as he saw a few of the other kids peek around the corner. "These people aren't going to help him be a hero. Making him reveal his activation requirements? There's a reason he hid them in the first place. If all the villains knew them, we can't simply bring a case against them." But Nedzu's eyes lit up. "There might be a loophole or two we can take advantage of." Shota looked at him suspiciously. "What are you?" Before he could finish his question, the couple came back into the room, Shinso in tow. The kid was looking at the ground and Shota felt a fair amount of rage when he realized that whatever those parents had said to him couldn't have been good. Shinso was dedicated and a good kid. What gave them the right to treat him like a threat just because of the way he was born? "Ah, Shinso," Nedzu said cheerfully, "how are you today?" The glance toward his foster parents was so quick that Shota might have missed it if he hadn't been expecting it, but it still wasn't a surprise when Shinso smiled and gave a thumbs up in reply to the question. The parents obviously didn't allow him to talk, because if Nedzu had asked the same question at school, preferably when Shinso was around those two gremlins from the support course, he would have replied verbally. Nedzu didn't comment on the nonverbal response. "That's good to hear. Well, you already know that you did very well at the sports festival, but I would like to be the first to congratulate you on being approved to transfer into the hero course." Shinso's eyes widened and he seemed to forget about the other people in the room as he grinned. "Really?" The soft gasp from his foster mother made him flinch and look at the floor again, carefully falling back into the purposefully bored persona Shota had seen him use a few times during the sports festival. He couldn't let the kid stay here. "Are you sure?" the woman finally asked. "Shinso is a dedicated student who will do well in the hero course," Nedzu said firmly. "That being said, there are a few concerns. Due to Shinso's unique quirk and circumstances, we were wondering if you would be interested in Shinso taking part in a mentorship program. He would be placed under the custody of a pro hero who would be able to keep an eye on him and make sure he becomes a hero." Shinso's foster father looked at them suspiciously. "You would be willing to make sure the boy doesn't get into any trouble?" "Of course." Nedzu nodded. "I know having a child like Shinso can be overwhelming. He would be taken out of your custody and placed somewhere with more individual care and supervision. None of this will take place without your express approval, of course." Shota saw a spark of fear pass behind Shinso's eyes and he tried to catch his eye. He didn't know exactly what Nedzu was trying to do either, but he'd known the rat long enough that he trusted him. Sure, what he was describing sounded more like a prison than anything else, but he had Shinso's best interests at heart. Shota could only trust that he knew what he was doing and hope that Shinso did the same. "So, he wouldn't be our foster child anymore?" the woman asked hesitantly. "No," Nedzu answered. "He would be placed in the custody of a pro hero." "And you'd make sure he stayed on the right side of the law?" the man confirmed. "Of course." Nedzu's smile was outwardly polite, but Shota could see his annoyance coming through underneath, which was oddly comforting. "So?" the couple whispered among themselves for a few minutes and Shota tuned it out after the first few sentences. It was clear that they didn't trust Shinso, and probably never would, but he still didn't trust himself to not do something he'd regret if he had to sit there and listen to them treating him like a villain. Finally, the couple turned back to them and the man started talking, glancing toward his wife for confirmation. I think that would be for the best." "When would he be leaving?" "Oh, immediately." Nedzu grinned widely. "We already have a hero lined up to take him in, so we'd like to move forward as soon as possible." Shinso was obviously trying to hide his panic, so Shota stood and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Well, kid, let's go grab your things." Shinso nodded slowly as Nedzu explained the necessary paperwork. Aizawa followed the kid upstairs, grateful to get away from that room. The room Shinso led him to was mostly bare and screamed of a kid who was used to not even having time to unpack before moving on to the next home. It only took him a few minutes to shove everything he owned into a garbage bag as Shota stood there awkwardly, wondering if he should offer to help. Soon enough, Shinso hauled the bag over his shoulder and nodded silently before heading back downstairs. Nedzu was already standing by the door and waiting for them when they got downstairs. Are you ready? Perfect. Well then, let's be on our way. Shinso didn't seem to have any desire to say goodbye to anyone, so they just led him outside and Shota opened the door to the backseat of the car to allow him to slide in. Then they were off and Shinso didn't even spare his old home a backward glance. He did look curious, however, which was understandable, considering that Shota was just as confused as he was. He cleared his throat. You're allowed to talk, you know. We're not going to punish you for asking questions. Shinso looked surprised, but still hesitated before saying anything. So, where are we going? Oh, that's easy. Nedzu chirped. We're going to the home of Eraserhead and present Mike. Aizawa will be taking custody of you, after all. I think maybe we have to turn it upside down. Izuku suggested. Or maybe we should 3D model it and see if it looks any different. For the past few days, Mei and Izuku had spent every moment they could in the halls of Ua, trying to figure out the tunnels. They probably would have just slept there, but both security and their parents had taken an issue with that, so they had settled for waking up early and exploring until security kicked them out around sunset. So far, they had identified a dozen different entrances, so far, but each one was protected by a unique riddle, so they hadn't been able to get into any of them yet. Mei chewed on the end of her pencil as she looked at the puzzle again. Wait. What if it's about directions? It spins, right? Izuku nodded and spun the map a quarter turn. He had hated it his first week because why put a map of Ua on the wall if it was incorrect? He'd gotten lost a few times trying to follow it until an upperclassman from the business course had taken pity on him and pointed out that the map itself was inaccurate. He'd written it off as an old map from before a remodel at the time, but now that he knew it as a clue to a secret entrance, it made a lot more sense. Izuku looked at it again. Wait, turn it right side up again. It says you are here, right? But the arrow is pointing to the cafeteria, not to where we are. Oh. You're right. Mei grinned. So should we look in the cafeteria? Maybe there's a clue there. Actually, I think you were right about directions. Izuku said. If we start at the cafeteria, what turns would we take to get to where we are now? Mei grabbed his hand and yanked him down the hall. There's only one way to find out. Tenya Iida closed the door behind him and finally broke down. His brother was paralyzed. There was no hope of him ever regaining the use of his legs and he would have to retire as a hero, all because some villain got into his head that he should maim and murder heroes. He didn't understand how Tensai could be so nonchalant about the whole thing. Why did Tenya have to be angry enough about it for both of them? He took off his glasses and wiped his eyes, then put them back on. There was no point in crying when he could take action. He was a hero. He was training to defeat villains. He couldn't just sit here and cry when he should be preparing to defeat Stain and make him regret ever making an enemy out of the Iidas. Guest bedrooms down the hall. Shota explained awkwardly. Bathrooms on the right and we can probably get you some more clothes and stuff once you're more settled in. Shinso nodded silently and disappeared into his new room as Shota sighed in exhaustion and reminded himself that putting Shinso with him and Hazashi was the best option. They could pass off the change in custody as protecting an at-risk youth, and because the original foster parents had approved the transfer and given their express approval, no one would question a pair of heroes taking protective custody until they were actually able to get a foster license. As much as he hated uprooting the kid, Shinso deserved to live in a place where he was allowed to speak. He glanced over to the couch, where Hizashi was giving him a knowing grin and showed a scowl. Don't even say it. Izuku read the directions out loud as Mei turned the map. Left, left, right, left, right, right, left. They both held their breath as they looked at the map, which was probably the only reason why they were able to hear the quiet click as the latch unlocked and one of tiles on the floor beneath them popped up. They shared an excited look before rushing to it and pulling it up like a trap door. Then they dropped down into the small tunnel and pulled the entrance closed behind them. Well, Izu-kun, Mei grinned manically in the low light. Are you ready to explore Ua?